ready to kick things off. We've got a lot of ground to cover today. So let me just introduce our webinar and get a couple of the preliminary issues out of the way. Again, this is our special webinar, the State of Compliance, Best Practices and Strategies for HR Teams in 2025. My name is Ryan Parker. I'm the Chief Legal Officer at SixFifty. And I think many of you have heard of SixFifty. I see we have a number of our customers that have joined us, but if you haven't heard of us, we're an HR platform and we help companies and practitioners to manage HR compliance, especially across multiple states. And so we have engines that can help you to create an employee handbook or an addenda, employment agreements, and we have a research tool that's really awesome and utilizes AI to help you find employment-related information so that you can either help your business or help customers all across the country. So we're excited about that. Before I introduce our guests, let me get to a couple preliminary matters. One, the chat is blowing up, which I love. Please keep chatting. I hope that you're able to connect and enjoy the chat. I'm getting some great snack ideas for my Super Bowl party. I appreciate that. If you have a substantive question, and this is pretty much going to be a panel, so we want to go kind of in the way that you want to go, put it into the Q&A so that we can track it and watch it. I'll be honest, it's sometimes hard for me to keep up with the chat once it gets going fast and furious. So if you have a substantive question, put it in the Q&A and we'll track that. We'll try to keep this a relatively organic conversation as we go through some of the the topics we're going to touch on here from the report. So let us know what you're thinking about there. Two, every webinar we get two questions. One, are you going to send us the slides? The answer is yes. We'll send you a follow-up email that will contain the slides. And two, are you going to send us a video? Because I want to pop some popcorn and watch it on the weekend. Yes, you can also rewatch. We'll send you a video recording of the webinar. So we'll probably get asked that again in the chat, but we'll have those. And then the last thing, yes, we do have codes that we're going to give you. I know many of you are wanting to make sure you get credit, and we will have SHRM, HRCI, and CLE credits that we'll read out near the end of the program. We can't send these out after the program, so please write them down when we give them to you because we can't send them out with the slides. So today we're going to be talking about a report that we created called the State of Employment Law Compliance in 2025. And I want to just give a special shout out to Seth Merrill from our content and marketing team who helped put this together. You know, HR is challenging. HR professionals are having to balance a whole bunch of different responsibilities across a number of different issues, often with very few resources. And so as we started to dig into the HR landscape, we wondered, we had questions about what was being prioritized, what was the most difficult, what kind of resources are HR teams using, and we couldn't find a good place to get that data. And we had access to a number of companies that we help at SixFifty's and other that we partnered with. And so we reached out and had hundreds of companies respond to our survey data to help us to create a report that we hope will be helpful to HR professionals as they're thinking about how they can address the important job that they do. So we hope that you'll take a chance. We're going to talk about some of the findings in the report, but if you scan this QR code, you can pull up the report for free. We'll also put a link in the chat. You can follow along, but we hope that this report really is a resource for HR professionals, you know, as you're figuring out how you're going to tackle the toughest issues that you face. We have three incredible panelists with us today who are going to help us talk about and think about some of the topics that are raised in the report. So I'm going to start with Saná Walker. She is a woman who needs no introduction. She is the president and founder of HR Girlfriends. Not only is she an HR consultant, she's an HR thought leader and one of the most fun people to talk to. So I'm thrilled that she's here. We love working with her. Every time we go to a conference, people are like, is Saná going to be there? She's one of our favorites. We're really grateful to have Saná joining us from California. Also with us today, Priscilla McMahon, who is in New Hampshire. She's joining us despite an incredible amount of snow that's currently falling at her house. We appreciate her. She's the president and principal consultant at the Work Life Group. And we're really excited to have Priscilla here. Like Saná, she works with a lot of companies. She brings a lot of experience in kind of boots on the ground. How are companies thinking about and taking care of these issues? And so we're really excited to have Priscilla and Saná here. And last but not least, we have Adam Wright. Adam Wright is the Vice President of Legal Product at SixFifty. Not only does he help build our tools, he implements the HR side of our legal tools at our company by heading up our handbook, looking at posters, do it when employees move. He does all that kind of stuff for us. And so Adam not only brings sort of experience building tools, but also implementing them for our company. And Adam is coming at us live from Albuquerque, wishing that he had some of that snow that Priscilla's getting, because Adam lives right by a ski resort, and it seems like all the time I see him sending pictures of him cross-country skiing or hitting the slope. So he's wishing he got that snow, because I think not a great snow year in Albuquerque from what I hear, Adam.
Right, yeah, we need Priscilla to send some our way.
Quit hogging all the snow there, Priscilla. Okay, let's jump into the agenda here. We're going to start with employment law challenges. We got some really interesting data on that. We're going to move to improving compliance processes and how we can kind of put the processes in place that we need for that, investing in compliance, and then we'll talk about new trends. So let's start it right off. The first question that we asked people, the two questions were highest priority areas and most time consuming. And the lists were interesting. We thought they might be exactly the same, but they are not. There's some issues that appeared on both lists, but I was a little surprised at some of our answers. And I thought I might just kick it over. Adam, if you want to just kick us off, anything on those lists jump out to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're really interesting. They're in a lot of ways not that surprising. I think a lot of these areas, both on the left and right side of the slide here, they all, to me, sort of relate or are caused by having a multi-state workforce. And that, we saw that increase during the pandemic, and it seems like it hasn't abated very much. We still see workforces going remote for a lot of companies that we work with. And that really adds to the complication of every area of the law. And I think the reason for that is probably most of the folks on the webinar know this, but the reason it's so complicated is because the law of the state where your employee works is the law that almost always is going to govern your employment relationship. So if you're a company based in Texas and 75% of your workforce is in Texas, that doesn't mean that you can get away with only following Texas law. So if you have an employee that works remotely in Oregon, you're also now going to need to follow all the employment laws of Oregon for that Oregon employee. And that really increases the complication of compliance in all these areas we see here. And I think these areas like, paid leave or sick leave, pay requirements, hiring, these are all areas that states have been really aggressive in legislating and regulating over the last several years. But yeah, I'm interested if Saná and Priscilla have what your takes are on these areas of law, and if you think, what you're seeing in these areas.
Well, I'm not surprised by the list at all. And I find it interesting that paid leave made it to both lists, right? That is definitely a challenge for many. And you're right, multi-state. I find that now that remote work is the standard and not the exception, a lot of employers are trying to balance, right? I want to hire the best talent, and they may not be in a state I'm already established, and that requires ground zero. And a lot of them are not prepared. And so they're winging it. And that's unfortunate. Yeah.
I wonder if, you mentioned the benefits, right, of having a remote workforce, right? You can access talent all over the country if you want, but there are challenges obviously that come with that. I'm wondering, both from Saná and Priscilla, like, with the companies that you work with, how are they striking that balance? Like, are they finding it worth the additional talent pool to have to then comply with all these extra state laws that they maybe didn't have to before?
I can tell you, in a lot of the clients that I serve, the awareness that our obligations for our compliance come with employee location rather than company headquarters was a bit of a revelation. And so I think during COVID, with a lot of organizations that were not operating from a remote first basis prior to COVID, they were like, great, I can access talent all over. And they really just started hiring, only then to find out that that came with, you know, tax registrations and employer registrations and all of the other requirements afterwards. And so I think for some of those teams, the jury's still out in terms of, was the juice worth the squeeze? Because they're trying to figure out, okay, now how do I catch up with those requirements? But it is certainly, now that they are aware, changing the calculus on how hard they look for certain types of talent in the areas where they're already registered, and how they are defining top talent across the board, which I think is interesting.
I love that point. Oh, go ahead, Saná.
No. I was just going to say, I absolutely agree, Priscilla. The jury is still out. But what I recognize with some of my clients is that as we started looking at how to be compliant in the new states they were hiring, they weren't really compliant in the states that they actually were headquartered. So that was like, as we started digging, I'm like, you're not compliant where you actually are set up. So those things are really interesting. And a part of the challenge is that takes an investment, a true investment in money and time to understand what your responsibilities are as an employer, and then do what you need to do to be compliant. And so there's really no way around it. I've got a lot of employers that ask me, well, what can I get away with? You can't ask me that. Listen, my job is to manage risk. So I'm going to tell you, do it all. And you tell me what you're willing to do. And I'll just document that I told you so.
Yeah. That's also a question that attorneys don't like to hear, Saná. That is, what can I get away with is a dangerous question. Going back to Priscilla's point, I think it's interesting too. I do think there's a difference, at SixFifty, we've sort of hired remotely and we've done it purposefully. And that's kind of been our plan. And we went in with our eyes open. But I do think companies that sort of, it just happened during the pandemic, or people moved and all of a sudden they were in multiple states and they didn't do it purposefully, sometimes we're in for a rude awakening. And it's interesting to me on this list, and we've actually gotten several questions on this. The issue that seems to be the most vexing for people is sick leave. What do you do about all these different leave, and specifically sick leave, because a lot of states have that, but these leave policies that are inconsistent and I wouldn't say contradictory, but difficult to put together. I'm interested, Saná and Priscilla, to hear kind of what you think about specifically the leave conundrum that I think is maybe one of the hardest parts about having employees in multiple states.
Well, for my clients, I'm always big on communication. When I worked in corporate HR, when I branched out into consulting, my philosophy has always been the same. More is more when it comes to communicating with your employees. Listen, they understand that there are nuances in their state laws, right? I didn't choose where you live. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do my best as your employer, right, to strike the balance. And as long as you're having the right conversations, right, and not just putting your handbook together and saying, please sign it, and allowing your employees to realize the differences, right? And a lot of times I'm finding that employers are streamlining and going away from the buckets of vacation and the buckets of, sick. And they're just like, look, PTO, do what you need to do. But when it comes to things like states that have leave for maternity leave, and some states don't, and what do you do? And the honest truth is, finances don't lie. Can you afford to bring it across the board? And if you can't, then you do the best you can, right? And so I have found that sometimes I have one employer where DC allows up to 8 weeks, and so they said, "Look, we can't afford to do the same in all states, but we'll pay you." I think it was like 4 weeks they were willing to pay, and so in the states that they didn't have paid leave requirements for maternity. So do the best you can, but always communicate.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. One question on this topic that we've had several questions already in the Q&A about this is similar to what to think about when you're using a PTO policy to cover your sick leave requirements. I think sometimes employers or HR teams may see that as like an easy way out, not to have to know what the state sick leave requirements are. It's like, okay, I'm just going to give you this PTO and then I don't have to worry about what the state sick leave laws are. But that's not always the case, right? When you're doing that, you still have to make sure that your PTO policy is providing at least as much sick leave as state law requires. And you also have to know what the carryover requirements are, whether, some states, if you front load, you don't have to carry over. So you still, it doesn't unfortunately get you out of having to sort of understand the nuance of those state laws, because your PTO policy still has to be as generous as whatever states your employees are in. So I don't know if Saná and Priscilla, if y'all, how your clients are dealing with those sorts of challenges.
Yeah, that's a great question, Adam. And I'll echo what Saná said, more is more. And so if you are an organization that has opted for the one bucket of PTO approach, specifically outlining that they should earmark up to 40 hours or 56 hours, depending on what the state allotment is, or your most sort of generous state allotment is for sick leave accruals. Saying, up to X amount of this can and should be used for sick leave. Because I think it's a great way to sort of empower people to understand this isn't just for when you're going to Cabo, right? Like this is also for when you have the flu, take this time to take care of you. I saw some questions about an unlimited PTO policy, and I think same thing there. It feels administratively light for us as HR professionals because it's, you've got this unlimited PTO policy, take it when you need it. I don't necessarily have to worry about the minutia or accrual rates or whatever it is. But I think the other thing to know is that in those types of policies, the other side of that is burnout, because you can't articulate to them in the same way you can with the sick leave policy. Hey, you should earmark X amount of this to go, use this for sick leave. For unlimited, I would recommend, again, to Sana's point, communicate. So like unlimited PTO, here's the average that we think you should be using. Holding managers accountable to minimum PTO usage structures on their teams is a great way to avoid some of the downsides of an unlimited PTO policy from a burnout perspective. But yeah, I think, even if you do go for that PTO bucket, to your point, Adam, being aware of carryovers, but being aware of accrual rates too. And so specific to sick leave, some states require that you accrue at a rate of 1 hour per every 30 worked. Other states have, different rates. And so specific to sick leave, a lot of my clients will pick that most conservative accrual rate and apply that, and then just look at that accrual rate on an annual basis relative exclusively to PTO. To Sana's point, you don't always have the luxury of doing that based on your budget for things like parental leave. So you do have to be more bespoke there, depending on the states that you're in. But for sick leave, that hack of picking your most conservative rule and following that on an annual basis can be helpful.
Some really great comments. I'll just add, the other thing you need to think about is payout. And there was a good comment there about what that could mean in California if you use PTO. I'll just jump on my soapbox for a minute. When we talk about unlimited or flexible PTO, I really don't like the term unlimited because it really is not unlimited. And if you tell people it's unlimited, you've kind of created an expectation that is not probably in step with what you're actually expecting. So I strongly prefer the term flexible PTO. But the other concern that I have sometimes with my team, and we have a flexible PTO policy, is, and I worked for a long time in an accrual environment where I accrued leave, is that when I accrued the leave, I felt like it was mine and I owned it and I took it. And I think sometimes in this unlimited PTO, another part of the communication, and Priscilla touched on this with sick leave, but I think it also with annual leave, is you need to make sure your employees are taking it, right? Just because they don't accrue it, they don't see on their pay stub that they earned that after so many hours, they need to make sure that they're taking the leave. And so you sort of have issues on both sides. You have people that, if you call it unlimited leave, might abuse it. And you have other people, because they're not accruing it, who don't use it. And so I think it goes back to Sana's point, which I really loved, with communication, more is just more. And on an unlimited, hopefully not flexible is what we'd call it, PTO policy, I think that communication is key.
Absolutely, Ryan. It's so funny. You and Priscilla's comments just now have my brain going culture, 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 right? If you are in a culture of work-life balance, right? This all makes sense, right? It's all par for course. And so it's interesting how so much of what we do in HR is all interconnected, right? And so, yes, get compliant, but I'm going to plug you to please look at your culture, right? Because it really will lend itself to policies that are utilized, that are embraced, and all of this stuff will be worth it, right? We put a lot of work and energy when you're doing HR right to get it right. And you want to make sure that your employees, one, understand it, because that's what I find too. Employees have no idea what they have, what's what. And so I urge you not to just communicate once, twice, come up with a communication plan. Remind them as often as you can, which makes sense. If you have flexible leave, be sure to take it when you go into different seasons, right? Every quarter with my employers I work with, I tell them at minimum, send out one quarterly message that encourages them to think about planning their leave for the next quarter, right? And we give them suggestions, right? Take a day off for mental health, take your kids somewhere, do something, right? So please look at your culture in addition to getting compliant. And I'll say one last thing. I cannot tell you how invaluable 650's 50 Stay Hiring Toolkit has been for me. Like when my employers are going into new states, that toolkit has been just just an amazing just conglomerate of this is what you need to do, checklist. My clients love it. It saves me, I can't even tell you how much time. And so I just want to thank 650 for doing what you do because you have made my job and my clients' lives a lot easier.
So now I got to tell you, music to my ears. I'm so glad that it works well for you. We have a whole team of attorneys. So we've got this big team. Adam and I are on the team, and we kind of have a group, and we're looking and monitoring changes to the law and putting this information together. And even for us as a team, it's challenging. I think this slide's interesting, and I want to kind of move to discussing, we've talked about the difficulties, but how are you seeing HR teams have success when they look at some of these challenging issues? And you can see like some of the ones that are the most challenging are ones we've touched on, right? Multi-state compliance, paid sick leave, separation, some of those things. And you can also see on the chart there that the more states you're in, the more time people report that they're spending on this. But a lot of HR teams are spread pretty thin. I kind of wonder what, and we can jump to the discussion here, like what strategies, what techniques, what processes are you seeing that are helping HR teams to, as we said, punch above their weight when it comes to managing this? Because there are challenges. I also think there are huge opportunities, and a lot of people are doing it. What are you seeing that's sort of leading to success?
I think it depends on budget. I mean, I've worked on teams where, you just have aspirations and no dollars, and like expectations and no dollars. And so, you're scouring the internet, setting up, I'm showing my age here, but like Google alerts for different sites so that you could get pinged when something happens. You're setting up DOL and EEOC website alerts to get notifications, or you're picking your labor law poster vendor and praying that they are the kind of vendor that's then going to send you an updated poster when the labor law changes, so that you can see that and read through what the change is and figure out if that's going to impact your policies. And then through the just the totality of all of that information, you're just really hoping that you're able to keep your organization, compliant through those free resources. But then I have also had the benefit of working at organizations that do have, some budget available for Tools like 650, SHRM has been a lifesaver. Peer-to-peer groups like HR Advisory are an excellent resource as well, where, maybe there's a small upfront subscription fee or something, but then you have access to the brain trust of all these incredible HR professionals. And so I think it's having access is sort of step one. Figure out the tools that work well for you, whether they cost money or they're free. But then step two is the discipline to check those with rigor and act on the information that you've seen. And I think that's where we all, well, I can only speak for myself. That's where I struggle because, especially on the small HR teams, firefighting often takes precedence over fire prevention. And so we are so neck deep in employee relations or hiring or whatever the thing is, that then the discipline to go through all of the content we've aggregated and figure out what the implications are for our business isn't always there in the way that we'd like it to be. So I think if you can set up some great automated feeds for information and get your resources tight, and then couple that with a disciplined strategy for execution, and maybe have some joint accountability there with other folks in your org, I think you've got the best shot of staying compliant, absent, partners like 650.
For sure. It's interesting because HR is not a profit center. And because we're not a profit center, HR professionals have to be positioned to be some of the best salespeople ever, because the things we need cost money. And so, you cannot bootstrap compliance. I wish I could tell you that that's the strategy, but the problem is when you bootstrap it, you will pay for it on the other end. You know what I mean? I have seen one employee report an organization for one violation to Department of Labor, and guess what happens when the Department of Labor comes in? They're going to look at everything, because guess what? Most companies, you could close your eyes, pick any company, and guess what's going to happen? You're going to find a violation. Why? Because we're human and there's margin for error. And so when you think about that, you have to just make sure that there's an investment in your compliance. We have to stop bartering with leadership. You say, listen, this is a requirement. Here's why it's a requirement. This is why we cannot bootstrap compliance, right? And if they want the best talent, they have to pay for it, right? Most of us don't know how much we're spending in compliance because most of us aren't really spending that much in compliance. And so one of the challenges, like, look, albeit, love SHRM, don't love SHRM, the reason I don't advocate for them as much anymore with all the options in the market, especially 650, is because SHRM's access is on an individual basis. So I join and I get access to compliance and content, right? But then that means that I have to then give my login and my information to my boss or to my assistant. And so there's a reason that they have it on an individual basis. I'm a proponent of platforms, one, that are robust, right? And that allow for access to the team so that it's not reliant on one particular person to go digging for the information. And invest, like, please invest, right? And so, yes, we're on a 650 webinar, but there's a reason that Priscilla and I are here, right? I'm a customer and I'm telling you, I was referred to them from an HR Girlfriends member. And I was like, what? And so when I found them, I was like, where have you been? So now I use 650 and an HR Girlfriends product called HR on Demand, because it's unlimited call in to speak to advisors. In concert, my clients are always winning. And so there are ways to work smarter, not harder. But to your point, Priscilla, if you're not talking to other people and you're not going, get the demo. I always tell people, know what you're saying no to, right? There are products out here that can help you, but we don't make time and we just assume it's too expensive and we can't. Know what you're saying no to. Lean in, get the information. If it's not now, it could be later.
Yeah. So no, I think you made a whole bunch of great points there. And I do think it's a great time to be looking at tools because, you know, we obviously love the tool that we've made, the tools we've made here at 650, but there's a lot out there that can serve as really helpful resources for sure. Let's jump, because I want to touch on, this is like something that I love talking about. I have a little bit of a controversial opinion about it, so I'll just sort of front that. But when we talk about compliance, we've talked about this already. You know, one of the things that's tricky is all these different policies, but part of having people in a lot of states and these legal changes is figuring out, you know, when you're going to implement those changes. And as things change, if you have the steps in place, I thought this was pretty interesting. You had 75% of companies said they review and refresh their handbook no more than once per year. 18, and I respect the honesty of these people, said that they don't remember the last time they reviewed or updated their agreements. And I suspect that number was actually even a little higher than those who responded. And I think this is an interesting issue because we've already talked about sort of challenges, not only with content, but with resources. But I'm interested to hear, you know, ideas on how often or what the ideal cadence is for thinking about your handbook and maybe reviewing legal changes, making changes in your handbook as needed. Interested to hear kind of from the three of you what you think best practices are, and also maybe what you're seeing among your clients as far as updating policies and thinking about, you know, changing handbooks.
Yeah, I think a couple things spring to mind. First, you know, Saná mentioned earlier culture, right? And so there are some organizations where, and certainly all the clients that I work with, I say, if your culture and values and your values are important to you, I shouldn't need to read your value statement to know what those things are. I should be able to look through your policies, and they should be written in a way that signals to me what your values are, what's important to you, and how you've operationalized those and lived those in your day-to-day. And so if it's that kind of an organization where the handbook is a living, breathing reflection of who you are as an organization, it's something that can be easily consulted, that people are going to on a regular basis for answers, then I think it's incumbent upon us to make sure that that document is updated as often as possible. And so to my earlier point around discipline, you know, we should be taking a look at that quarterly. You know, in organizations, I work with a lot of nonprofits that unfortunately, you know, not a ton of budget to invest in things, but are held to compliance at a disproportionate rate, you know, sometimes even at the same level as our GovCon clients. And so they have to comply. They don't necessarily have the resources to do that. And so in those situations, having team lunch and learns where everybody sort of gets together all of the stuff that they've learned over the course of the quarter about human resources. They have the lunch and learn, they have the conversation, and then the team discussion is, what impact is that going to have on our handbook? What changes do we have to make? What policies should we be thinking about coming down the pike? Operationalizing it in that way kind of makes it fun. It makes it a team activity if you've got a team, right? If the benefit and privilege of a team. But those things can be really helpful. And I think certainly quarterly is ideal. But there are other organizations where, you know, the handbook is truly just, especially if HR hasn't been a big part of their DNA, the HR is truly just a document that was created, you know, sometimes by an attorney, written in language that can feel impenetrable and just, you know, like sterile. And it's there exclusively to, you know, cover them in the event of an issue, and they only dust it out if they need to wave it around in self-defense. And in those kinds of organizations, I will still advocate that they review the darn thing and warm it up a little, and keep it current at least on an annual basis. But I think your culture and the extent to which it's seen as a living, breathing document should influence how often you are updating it.
One
I
thing,
want to go right ahead, Adam.
you go ahead, Saná, and then I'll jump in.
No, I just wanted to answer Diana Gonzalez's question around reviewing and making edits to handbooks quarterly. Are employees supposed to sign and update a handbook acknowledgement? My recommendation, Diana, is that if you're looking at it on a consistent basis, I tell my clients, well, first of all, I am a huge tech proponent. Find a platform that will alert you when laws update, will give you signals, right? Emails and alerts that say, hey, these laws are changing, or look out for this, or this state has made adjustments. But in addition to those, so anything that's law related and required, and it is, and the effective date is before maybe the annual sign off, then yes, you probably need to get them on board to sign. But I like to update the handbook and do the one sweep. And how I say that is keep it updated so that when you do the one signature, it's ready to go. So anything you don't have to implement, it's really about the planning part, right? And so that's for me is don't wait till the last minute and don't wait for the one time to put all the policies in. Slowly add them, get employee input, and then do the one sign off unless it's required and legal.
Yeah, that's a question we get a lot, and I think that's a great answer. Certainly for sort of small changes you're making to your pets in the workplace policy, you don't need an acknowledgement for that, every time you send that, every time you make a change to that policy. But I think Saná hit the nail on the head there. One thing I was going to add is, this conversation about updating, we focused on handbooks and for a good reason. But I also want to make sure folks aren't forgetting the agreements, the employment agreements that they're using with their employees. So I'm talking here about non-competes, non-solicitation agreements, NDAs, invention assignment agreements. All of those agreements, those areas of laws are regulated pretty heavily by states and in some instances the federal government, and they're areas of the law that change quickly. So, when we're talking about agreements, it's a little different from handbook in that we're generally not talking about agreements that you've already entered into with employees. Like if non-compete law changes, typically that's going to be just apply going forward and not retroactively. That's not always the case. But generally, you're not going to need to go and have employees re-sign an employment agreement that they've already signed. But if you're a company that has a form employment agreement that you're using for all employees sort of going forward, you need to take a look at those pretty regularly too, because there's some real risk, I think, with not looking at your employment agreements. And I'll just give you a quick example here. But Colorado is one of many states that has a pretty strict non-compete law. And so they have a salary threshold. If an employee doesn't make a certain amount of money, you can't enter a non-compete agreement with them. And not only can you not enter a non-compete agreement with them, you can't even ask them to sign a non-compete agreement. So in Colorado, if you have a form agreement that you haven't updated with Colorado to reflect new Colorado law, and you ask this employee to sign this employment agreement and it has a non-compete that is unlawful under Colorado law, you are right there subject to civil penalties. And so that is just one example of, I think, why we don't want to forget about agreements too when we're talking about reviewing our employment documents.
Yeah, thanks for flagging that, Adam. I'll just say in a webinar I did a while back, I suggested that companies should update their handbook once a month. And I'll tell you what, the audience got out their pitchforks. And what I really meant was, I think there's some benefit to reviewing the legal changes that come in every month. I didn't mean you had to update your handbook, but the one thing I've noticed as we've talked to people at 650 is that the thing that HR people hate the most is getting to the end of the year and then having to go back and find all the things that changed that have not been updated. And that also means that your handbook was out of date. And so I'm kind of a proponent, and this is just the way that I like to operate, of a little bit of effort continuously, saving me a lot of effort, at an inconvenient time. And so I do think there's some advantage to at least taking an opportunity to see what's changed in the law and what's changed in your organization, right? If you've had someone move to a new state, or if you've grown and you've passed an employee threshold, those can require some pretty important changes to your handbook. And if you just wait till the end of the year, that could change in March and you could be out of compliance for several months. And so I do think a little continuous effort goes a long way. And I wouldn't say update your employee handbook every month, but I do think watching and monitoring and putting in that little bit of effort can save you a lot of unpleasant effort at the end of the year. So I'll make sure I don't say to change the handbook, but I do think it's important. I actually want to skip ahead just a little bit because we're moving. Let's move to slide 16 and talk about just, we've had a really good discussion. So there's a lot of different investment that we see in, and we ask people about investment, because one of the questions we often get is, well, what are other people doing? How are they spending? How are they spending on HR? What are they thinking about? And you've already touched on it. You know, I think we have a situation where HR, I think Saná, you said not a profit center. I think Priscilla said often understaffed and underfunded. What are some things that you see that HR teams are able to do to be able to get the funding and I guess the resources that they need? And I'm a little biased. I think that HR is one of the most important parts of a company, because I think a company is only as good as its people. And at its sort of baseline, HR is probably has one of the biggest effects on how people feel about the work they're doing and the people that they work for. But what are you seeing as sort of strategies that are working for your clients to be able to sort of free up resources, or at least have management understand the importance of meeting these HR obligations?
Do your homework. Do your homework. I mean, honestly, here's the thing. You can't make an argument if you don't understand what you're arguing for, right? You need to be able to communicate effectively why it's important for them. I can't sit in front of a client and say, it's really important that you do a handbook. They're like, okay. I'm like, it's your first line of legal defense. Okay. Well, guess what? I am armed with examples of how unemployment cases blow up, how different things occur, legal cases. Like, I have the mental bulleted list of all the examples that I can hit to ensure that whoever I'm in front of understands, in the way in which they understand information, why this is important. Can I make them do it? No, but I'm armed because I've done my homework. And so you have to do your homework. You have to understand yourself as an HR professional, the why, but not just the why. Be armed with stats, right? This report is great. You know what I mean? Whatever it takes. And again, you have to, so listen, on average, most HR people are moving jobs, what, 12, 18 months, 24 months? When you walk into a new role, before you walk into a new role, please understand their commitment to investing in compliance.
Mhm.
Compliance is your whole job. That is the crux of your job. If you are asking them about your salary and what you're going to get paid and what are the perks, but you're not asking them what's your investment currently in compliance? What is that investment? What are you looking to do? What are you committed to doing? Then you're really missing an opportunity, because a lot of times you get to the job and then you start learning that they don't care, that it's not that big of a deal, and that they're willing to skirt and move around things. And so please, as you start, looking at because I always tell people, and especially in HR, it's interesting how the company operates is such a close relationship sort of intersect in our professional endeavor, right? Like, your job is compliance. So please know. And even if you say yes to the job offer, at least start looking for the freebies and do what you can, right? Until you can get some money.
It's so true. And one thing you said, I loved, that you're communicating it in the way in which they understand information. So often small to mid-size organizations started out without HR, or they had a finance person running HR, or it just wasn't a thing and they didn't bring us on until something bad happened and now they need to sort of clean up. And so there isn't this intrinsic understanding of the value that we bring to the table. They do, however, work really closely with their CFOs and they know what the numbers look like. And so I think it's important for us as HR leaders, especially those of you who are alone in your organizations, to link up and work cross-functionally with the other people in your organization. Get with the finance person and say, hey, this is what the fines look like if we're found to be willfully disregarding XYZ employment laws. What's that going to do to our EBITDA if they catch us, right? And now the CFO and you are in there talking about actual impact to numbers. It can also be really helpful if maybe, you're not that out of compliance that the numbers story, like say the number story isn't scary enough, to go work with your salespeople and say, hey, how strong are our competitors from a compliance standpoint? I think this can be an amazing differentiator for us, but we need to invest in, I don't know, a tool like SixFifty, or we need to invest in certifications for our teams. And what percentage of the next sale will that investment be, right? If we win the next 3 things in your 3-month pipeline, what percentage is that here? And just use the people around you to make a business case, because to Sanaa's point, our leaders aren't always programmed to understand the arguments that we're intrinsically going to make. And so we have to partner with the other experts and show them what diversity of thought looks like in action, and make the case for the tools that we need to do what we've been tasked with doing.
Priscilla, I dropped EBITDA. For those who have no idea, go grab it and look up. But it's the taxes, depreciation. Because when you said it, I went, oh, let's see. They may not know, but that's
right.
okay. That's okay.
Thank you.
The other cost I can think of is retention, employee retention, right? Like if you don't have the right culture, you're going to have a hard time retaining people. And that is incredibly expensive when you have that turn. So in addition to sort of the compliance issues with regulators, I think you can run into sort of retention issues that can be really tough. I do think this is interesting. There's a lot of different ways that companies can sort of spend their money, but I wonder if there's anything that jumped out at you kind of about, we know it's a limited pool, but any thoughts on kind of how people are spending when it comes to HR?
I'm not surprised by what I see here, but what I find interesting is the 93% for in-house work by HR or legal firms. Typically, small to mid-sized market, you don't have in-house counsel, right? And so you are relying on external resources. And truly, here's what I tell HR professionals. You're getting paid what you're getting paid. We are high paid professionals now, right? Most of us are closer to 6 figures than we've ever been. There's a reason you're getting paid what you're paid, because there is an expectation that you are going to come through the door armed and ready to help manage risk, make sure they're compliant, and do all the things, right? And so for me, with that expectation, you've got to work smarter, not harder. How are you getting your information? But also, please know when you're at the line where HR and legal sort of meet, right? Sometimes HR oversteps. We're not lawyers, right? We have a responsibility to understand law and communicate, but we're not lawyers. So resources like 650, right? Shameless plug, HR on demand by HR girlfriends, but do what you need to do to ensure that you have the tools necessary, and stop allowing your leadership to barter and bargain, right? Like, it's a requirement, and that's what you have to go in, and don't stop. Like, lean on them until they say yes.
I love it. Well, we have a number of resources here that I put up. I actually just want to I wish that we could keep going. In fact, I feel like we could do multiple parts here because there's so many things I wanted to talk about. But this was the data from the document that we've been covering was from late in 2024. I kind of am interested, just as a last thought, and Priscilla, we'll start with you. What do you think we're going to see moving forward? What are some hot trends that people should be thinking about in 2025? We put a couple of options, but anything jump out to you as something that people should be thinking about or keep on their radar as we move into 2025?
Yeah, I mean, I think to the extent that you can automate the flow of information into your day-to-day life, I think AI is great. Using AI to aggregate the information and take the place of those Google search alerts I told you about earlier, to the extent that you can do that, I think that's really important. But the thing I'd want to leave everybody with is the thought that compliance absolutely does not have to be overwhelming. I feel like there's so many that's happening right now that's making us all feel spread very thin. And so when you think about the enormity of the responsibility of multi-state compliance and these things that our leadership has tasked us with and that we've willingly taken on because we are people who want to do the right thing, I think it's important to not allow yourself to be overwhelmed by what appears to be the enormity of it, right? Automate what you can, leverage the tools available at your disposal, leverage third-party tools like SixFifty, leverage other resources, pick up the phone, call, ask questions of your consultants, your attorney friends as well, outsource wherever you can. And again, just try to simplify the policies. What policy can I put in place that applies to as many of these requirements as possible? And then just be really diligent about follow-up, gentle with yourself, and really, practice, just practice some care as you tackle all of this, because it can feel like a lot, but it doesn't have to. So I think a big trend should be automating and taking care of you as you do it.
Well, I can't agree more. I'm trying to figure out what to add, Priscilla, because those are all great, great points. But again, there are a lot of technology platforms and a lot of services that you have access to. And the one thing I was thinking, Ryan, when you were on the slide with the codes and everyone was doing the poll for whether or not they wanted a demo, that's the part where I say, know what you're saying no to, right? I don't care where you start, but start somewhere. If you're not using a resource or service to keep updated with your handbook, with laws, and if you are relying on your time to go and get it, that's probably where you're making a mistake. So please lean into services and platforms that are bringing you the information, right? Not just you going to get it. We're busy professionals. Have competing priorities, and AI is going to be huge. Most of the platforms that we're working with, including 650, are embedding AI. So a lot of times it's just finding the right one for your organization, and making sure that there's a budget for it. So I know we're already in most people's fiscal year, but it's not too late. If you need to have best use case in the argument, use the sales professionals at these companies that are selling you the product. You ask them, help me build a use case. Tell me what's so great about your product. How do I get my leadership to buy in and move on and to come on board? So you don't have to know everything. You just have to know how to ask the right questions, right? And how to lean into some of the right resources. And please understand that the new administration is not here to play with us. They are moving fast and furious. And employment law is a wide, wide area that is going to be addressed. And it may not always be addressed in the ways in which we think, but I assure you, whether it's lack of funding in certain areas, or other areas where they're looking to make reductions in laws that we have become accustomed to, please stay abreast, because that's the only way you're going to be able to serve your employees at the highest level.
That's a great point. Saná just brought up something that's probably on the top of a lot of people's minds right now, which is the changes coming with the new administration that we are seeing a ton of already. We actually, if you're interested, just did a webinar on this last week. And so we really dove deep into that issue. So you can check out our webinars page if you want to dive deeper into that topic. I think just to echo what Saná and Priscilla said, that, we put on a lot of these webinars where we're talking about the complexity of employment law, especially with multi-state workforces. And one fear I always have is that we're sort of going to overwhelm you in the complexity, but really what we're trying to do, and what I hope we've done today, is empower you to know that you can do it. And I'm a firm believer that the benefits of remote work and having a wider talent pool are really worth the challenges that you're facing. And I know Saná, our team here, and Priscilla are all working to make that those challenges easier for you. So yeah, we hope we empowered you a bit today to tackle these challenges. And I just wanted to say thank you again to Priscilla and Saná for joining us. It's been a real pleasure to have you on, and hopefully we can do this again. And yeah, thank you everyone for joining today. And we hope you have a great rest of your day and you join us again sometime for another 650 webinar.
Thank you,
Thank
Adam
you.
and Ryan. Thank you, 650 guys, for having us, and see everyone later. Happy
Bye.
compliance.
Bye.
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 Bye.